Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Just the facts, folks, and those are them. Like it says in the intro, I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Hey, before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to share something with you guys. I had the honor of participating for the third year in the Hillbilly Horror Stories 6th annual Halloween special, alongside some other really great shows like Hillbilly Horror Stories, but also From the Shadows and Jim Harold's Campfire. So go check out the Hillbilly Horror Stories Halloween special. Big thank you to Jerry and Tracy Pauley. I will post a link to it in the show notes from today's episode, and I'll also be posting about it on social media. Alright, got a pretty wild and woolly story for you today. It's a little bit like a real-life Gone Girl. It'll definitely raise the hair on the back of your arms and give you the goose flesh. So now, if you're ready, please join me as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, real life or lifetime movie, the Cyberstalking of Angela Diaz, starts now. In 2016, Angela Diaz's life seemed to be straight out of a storybook. She'd recently tied the knot with Deputy U.S. Marshal Ian Diaz, and was basking in the intoxicating aura of newfound marital bliss. On top of that, the promise of an expanding family, heralded by the imminent arrival of not one, but two bundles of joy, that's right, twins, made her existence feel even more complete. It was as if fate had bestowed upon Angela a celestial alignment of joyous circumstances. Her life felt idyllic, the epitome of matrimonial and familial perfection. But, and there's always a but in these stories, isn't there? No matter how perfect Angela's life seemed, beneath the facade of serenity, a storm was brewing, an insidious tempest that would shatter her world, striking at the very core of our collective faith in humanity. You see, Angela found herself the target of an unspeakable menace. Sinister emails began flooding her inbox, dripping with vitriolic language laced with biblical references that made the malevolent messages all the more terrifying. These were not mere words. These emails were designed as instruments of psychological torture, and coupled with the textual threats were macabre visual elements, stomach-churning images of dead babies that would sear themselves into the psyche of even the most hardened individual. It was a meticulously executed campaign of terror calculated to erode Angela's emotional well-being and sense of safety. It was as though some purely evil entity sought to snatch away her newfound happiness, shrouding her life in a veil of darkness and fear. And what made this all the more harrowing was the inexplicable nature of the attacks. Who would commit such vile acts, and why target Angela, who seemed to have nothing but joy and light in her life? The unsettling dichotomy between Angela's idyllic life and the menacing cloud that loomed over her serves as a cautionary tale. It raises a mirror to society, reminding us that even those who appear to have it all are not immune to the vulnerabilities that make us all fundamentally human. The facade of perfection can easily crack, revealing the unsettling realities that lie just beneath the surface, waiting to upend our lives when we least expect it. Further amplifying the horror of her situation, Angela Diaz reported to law enforcement that her home, what should have been her sanctuary, had become a theater of intimidation and menace. This was no figment of anxious imagination. Actual strangers were haunting the perimeters of her property, and they were not merely passive observers. They arrived with explicit, chilling intent to vocally communicate threats of sexual assault. The audacity displayed was beyond comprehension, a stomach-churning violation of personal space and peace. The calculated nature and organizational level of these intrusive acts led investigators to contemplate a deeply unsettling notion. Could there be a puppet master, operating from the shadows, directing this symphony of psychological and emotional torment? Cases like this are a waking nightmare for law enforcement. Not only do they involve calculated psychological intimidation, but they also present the horrifying transition from digital terror to real-world threat. This escalation from horrifying and threatening emails into actual physical intimidation wasn't merely an act of casual malevolence. Rather, it appeared to be a campaign of terror, artfully designed to throw every aspect of Angela's life into chaos. As investigators delved further into the case, their findings peeled back layers of sinister intent, revealing a twisted plot so unimaginable it seemed the stuff of dark fiction. It was established that someone had been impersonating Angela Diaz on the internet. However, this wasn't some financially driven case of anonymous identity theft. Whoever had been impersonating Angela was responding to advertisements on Craigslist explicitly focused on fulfilling rape fantasies. This went far beyond the parameters of ordinary stalking. It was a coordinated effort to psychologically, emotionally, and potentially physically destroy a person, destroy Angela Diaz. This was a specialized form of cyber torture. The rape fantasies posted to Craigslist by whomever was impersonating Angela received multiple responses from the deplorables lurking at the edges of the internet. The police zeroed in on these would-be rapists, found them, and interviewed them. And one of the men involved, who turned out to be more talkative than his apparent co-conspirators, cracked open the case wide enough for the police to peer into its appalling depths. Angela's home address had been distributed to him and to the other respondents, along with an in-depth itinerary of her daily life. Details as specific as the paths she frequented while walking her dog were disclosed. Even more horrifying was the instruction given to these strangers that resistance on Angela's part should not deter them from carrying out their vile task, should not deter them from raping her. This explicit command raised the level of premeditation and moral bankruptcy to an almost incomprehensible degree, and things only got worse from there. Soon after, police were called to a dimly lit alley, where they found Angela Diaz in acute distress. She bore the physical markings, visible bruises on her head, of narrowly averted disaster. According to Angela, she had just managed to fend off an attacker, a man hell-bent on transforming the abhorrent digital threats and fantasies into physical violence, aimed squarely at Angela. Angela's ordeal shakes the very foundations of trust and personal security. It serves as a stark indictment of the ways in which technology can be manipulated to wreak havoc on innocent lives, dragging real people into nightmares spun in the bowels of the internet. It also opens up difficult questions about society's role in fostering environments where such acts can be conceived and executed with chilling precision. The dehumanizing objectification of Angela Diaz is not just an affront to her as an individual, it's a scourge on our collective consciousness, urging us to reflect on the moral fiber of a culture that could produce individuals capable of such heinous acts. It confronts us with the disturbing realization that evil can be organized, planned, and executed in our midst, against people who could easily be our neighbors, our friends, or our family. But now suddenly it appeared that Angela would find poetic justice. She told the police that Michelle Hadley, her husband Ian's former fiancée, was the architect behind her torment. With the introduction of Michelle, the pieces of this perplexing puzzle seemed to suddenly coalesce, forming a narrative infused with chillingly logical motivation. Michelle Hadley had every reason to harbor a vendetta against Angela Diaz. According to Angela's account, she had stolen Ian from Michelle on the very day they first met. Compounding this perceived betrayal, Angela and Ian had taken up residence in the very same condominium that Michelle and Ian had initially bought together. And remember, Michelle was not just Ian's girlfriend, she was his fiancée. And so Ian and Angela, cohabiting in the condo that Michelle and Ian had bought together, was not a minor detail. It was a grievous provocation in Michelle's eyes, and one that she had openly and, understandably frankly, been opposed to. She was a part owner of the condo, for Pete's sakes. But for the law enforcement agencies involved, it seemed as though they were finally about to bring down the curtain on this grotesque spectacle. Michelle Hadley appeared to be the quintessential suspect, driven by a volatile mixture of jealousy, resentment, and love gone sour. If we had a nickel for every time those three ingredients had led to murder, we'd all be rich. This narrative was archetypal in structure, a woman spurned, resorting to diabolical means to exact revenge. Michelle was promptly arrested, and it seemed as though Angela Diaz could finally exhale. But let's pause here. While it might be tempting to accept this neat resolution at face value, we're reminded that the narrative we so easily latch onto isn't always the ultimate truth, which is to say the easy answer often isn't the right one. The idea of a scorned woman exacting revenge is a storyline deeply ingrained in our societal consciousness, almost to the point of cliché. I'd go so far as to say well past the point of cliché. In fact, it appeals to our sense of order, offering a clear-cut villain upon whom we can heap our collective disdain. Yet, as this case unfolds, we're compelled to grapple with the uncomfortable realization that life seldom offers the satisfaction of straightforward answers. Sometimes the person we're quick to label as the perpetrator may well in fact be another victim, a pawn in an even darker game. So, as we examine this case, let's remember to question our own assumptions, because when it comes to true crime, appearances can be exceedingly deceptive. And it turns out that Angela Diaz's case is no exception. In a stunning reversal that felt more like a movie than real life, forensic investigators made an earth-shattering discovery. The origin of the grotesque emails with pictures of dead infants and biblical threats, as well as the revolting rape fantasy Craigslist ads, ostensibly posted by a person impersonating Angela, could in fact be traced back to a singular point: Angela Diaz herself. That's right. Allow a moment for your mind to grapple with the staggering audacity of this revelation. Angela Diaz was not the victim she had portrayed herself to be. She was the puppeteer, pulling the strings of this horrific web of deception. Her supposed victimhood was nothing but a smokescreen, a mask meticulously designed to manipulate the authorities, entrap an innocent woman, and perpetrate a ruse so insidious that it put her own well-being at risk. The complexity of this scheme raises questions about the psychological intricacies that enabled her to execute such a dark conspiracy. Instantly, what seemed like a straightforward case burst open, tearing asunder pre-established assumptions and unleashing a torrent of new inquiries. What motivations could possibly drive Angela Diaz to engineer this insidious charade? Was this an elaborate scheme aimed at isolating Ian from his previous life, thereby solidifying her own standing by erasing Michelle Hadley from the picture completely? Or was it something else? And how could she stomach the notion of jeopardizing her own physical well-being as well as the lives of her unborn twins in service of this bizarre, evil, Machiavellian plot? And let's not forget Michelle Hadley, the collateral damage in Angela's wicked game. Wrongfully arrested, implicated in monstrous crimes she had no part in, Michelle's life was turned upside down. She spent 88 days behind bars, her existence capsized by an elaborate lie. As the veil was lifted, what emerged was a staggering portrait of deceit so intricate it defied comprehension. Angela Diaz wasn't merely an ordinary fabricator of tales. She was a pathological liar, whose craft involved designing illusions of such magnitude that they redefined the word audacity. In an alarming physical manifestation of her mendacity, Angela didn't just fabricate emails and threats, she actually orchestrated her own rape attempts. This was not just a digital charade. This was a woman exploiting the most intimate corners of her life, manipulating reality to a degree that put her own safety at risk, all to frame Michelle Hadley, her romantic competitor. The brazenness of her manipulations transcended the boundaries of what we normally conceive as possible in human deceit. She seemed to be going toe-to-toe with the serpent himself for the title of human history's greatest and most toxic liar. But the layers of lies didn't stop there. Angela's proclaimed twin pregnancy, which had imbued her story with an added vulnerability and gravitas, was also a carefully constructed illusion. The sheer moral bankruptcy it must have taken for her to acquire false sonograms from Etsy and present them to Ian and his family is staggering. The psychological contortions necessary for such a maneuver are unsettling to contemplate, to say the least. Angela Diaz's actions were a betrayal not just of individual trust, but of one of the most primal human relationships, that between expectant parents and their unborn child. And yet, Angela's duplicitous ambitions were even grander. She aimed to parlay her web of falsehoods into a public narrative by developing a lifetime TV movie based on her experiences, entitled A Darkness Within, the Angela Diaz Story. The irony here is almost too much to bear. The story itself would have been another layer of deception, a tale within a tale, a darkness within an already impenetrable darkness. This convoluted tale begs us to question our own gullibility and the limitations of our empathetic instincts. It forces us to consider how easily we're drawn into compelling narratives, particularly when they engage our emotions and moral sensibilities. Angela's case serves as a sobering reminder that sometimes the monster isn't hiding under the bed or lurking in a dark alley. Sometimes the monster has been sleeping right next to you all along. In a long-awaited moment of reckoning, justice was finally catching up with Angela Diaz. The cache of incriminating data that forensic experts extracted from Angela's computer could no longer be ignored or explained away. And with this newfound evidence, the authorities were able to clear Michelle Hadley's name, setting her free from the unjust imprisonment she had endured. However, this exoneration couldn't rewind the clock on the 88 days Michelle Hadley had spent confined behind bars, nor could it magically restore her tarnished reputation. The repercussions of Angela Diaz's web of deceit had caused irreparable harm. While Michelle might have been physically unshackled, the emotional and psychological chains could take years, if not a lifetime, to break. Her existence had been indelibly altered, her trust in the legal system and in the goodness of people profoundly shaken. Angela Diaz's case is a horrifying reminder of the lengths to which some individuals will go to deceive and manipulate, not just bending the truth, but shattering it entirely. And it speaks volumes about the double-edged sword of our digital age, where identity can be fabricated, reality distorted, and lives destroyed with a few strokes of a keyboard. We must remain vigilant in scrutinizing the stories we hear, the evidence presented, and the characters involved, for the truth is often hidden under layers of well-crafted lies. In 2017, Angela Diaz faced the consequences of her actions. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to a staggering array of crimes. Her rap sheet was a laundry list of terrible actions: perjury, grand theft, 2 counts of kidnapping by way of implicating innocent people through law enforcement, and 2 counts of false imprisonment, also achieved by manipulating the police. One marvels at the spectrum of crimes which not only involved lying, but also manipulated the entire system to carry out Angela's vendetta. And yet we're not quite done. The saga of Angela Diaz's deceit takes yet another shocking turn, with a revelation that emerged only this year in 2023, when Angela's husband at the time, U.S. Marshal Ian Diaz, they are now divorced, was brought to justice. He faced multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit cyberstalking, actual cyberstalking, perjury, and obstruction of a federal matter. The very house of cards that he and Angela had so painstakingly constructed finally had crumbled, exposing a sordid truth that had remained concealed for far too long. That's right, Angela and Ian had engaged in the conspiracy to frame Michelle Hadley in this shocking saga of horrific, stomach-churning lies, deceit, and manipulation together. It's all the more unsettling to know that Angela and Ian had been partners in the heinous crime from the outset, that their unholy alliance was aimed at framing Ian's former girlfriend Michelle Hadley, all for a shockingly prosaic motivation: Michelle and Ian's bitter dispute over the condominium that they had jointly purchased. The intent in framing Michelle and ruining her life was to force her to relinquish her stake in the property. Finally, on June 3, 2023, the wheels of justice ground to their inexorable conclusion, delivering a resounding verdict. Ian Diaz, once a U.S. Marshal, was sentenced to a prison term of 10 years and 1 month. The story of Angela and Ian Diaz serves as a harrowing reminder that the pursuit of material gain, coupled with a willingness to manipulate and deceive, can lead individuals down the darkest of paths. It's a stark commentary on the lengths to which some are willing to go in their quest for self-interest, even if it means tearing apart lives and exploiting the very systems designed to protect us. The truth, in this case, proved to be far more unsettling than fiction, and challenged our understanding of human behavior in its most grotesque and self-interested form. Please do go listen to the 6th annual Hillbilly Horror Stories Halloween special. I'll post a link in the show notes. Thank you for spending your time with me. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.